Well, the 2024-2025 Winnipeg Jets season has come to an end, and now it's time to take stock of what the Jets accomplished and what they can still accomplish in the future.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, yesterday, probably one of the hardest episodes I've had to put out. You know, I think I'm still not entirely over what happened. I'm probably going to be thinking about this Dallas Stars series for many years to come, and sort of all the circumstances. But from the heartbreak, obviously, there's a lot of good that came out of this season. And I think it's worth kind of taking stock about what went well and how the Jets can sort of grow from this, right? We're going to have some moments later during this offseason and really later this week, kind of ripping off the Band-Aid on things where maybe the Jets need to improve. Maybe the Jets need to rethink how they do things. But let's focus for now on what the Jets accomplished and take stock of the season. We'll chat about that in just a brief second here and sort of talk about the growth of the team and what really lies ahead. But before we do, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, let's start from the top, right? Regardless of my own personal feelings about how this team is in the postseason, this year was a huge success for the Jets, right? It wasn't a failure. It wasn't, the fraud squad getting exposed. It had a different tenor. And I think the way that the Jets have routinely come back from adversity and have really pushed for almost every point that they possibly could get really shows that this team has changed in a lot of ways. You look at the past few years of where Winnipeg was under, Maurice and how toxic things were. And you look at where they finished this season, they won a President's Trophy. It's the first. It's first time it's ever happened. In fact, this year was a first for a lot of things. Hellebuck became the first, Jet, and really one of the first, one of the few, I think, one of the first goalies ever to win the Jennings Trophy solo back-to-back years. I don't know if that's happened before. I seem to recall that being the first time. You had a first Jets franchise President's Trophy, not really having won the West all that many times or ever really. So this is a big moment in so many ways. And I think for the Jets, this felt like a year where maybe there was finally a breakthrough in some ways. I think the Jets really gave it their all. They came very far. And I think at the end of the day, they did run into some of the, the limits of their own greatness. And I think that's where, the future is a lot more intriguing for this team than maybe it was before. But all that said, I think we're all going to look very fondly upon this team. They got a President's Trophy, right? I think it's really important to keep reiterating that the playoffs sometimes are a little cruel in that those individual moments and those small differences that can be not relevant in the grand scheme of the 82-game season suddenly get magnified in the playoffs. You had everything from Hellebuck having to rewrite his playoff narrative to the Jets having to come back multiple times from, being down in games to miraculously make it through. And so there was a ton of drama. There were incredible moments. There were some low points with some big injuries and some tough losses. But at the end of the day, this Jets season is one that I think everyone should be very happy about. Arniel took, his first full season as a head coach, really earned the respect and trust of the team and took it about as deep as we've been in a very long time. The Jets, up until the season, really hadn't won more than like one or two playoff games a series for the past several years. It's been a lot of embarrassment for the Jets. And so for Winnipeg to finally be able to sort of break that curse and maybe get it through that hurdle feels like a moment that's really important for this team. Do I know where it goes after this? No. And I will be honest, I have no idea what this, this offseason looks like. As I said, we're going to talk about that throughout the next few weeks and stuff. But I think, first things first, it's worth celebrating the season. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to acknowledge and talk about where the failures came in. There were some big ones. You've heard me talk about it before, but I think for the moment we're going to wait to rip off that band-aid until a little later this week. But in the meantime, the Jets accomplished a lot, and I think that is something to be proud of. And, the Game 6 moment where everyone rallied around Scheifele, to me, shows just how far this team has come, and in a lot of ways represents sort of the heart and soul of what the Jets are. And so how they evolve from that, how they grow from that, I'm intrigued and excited to see that. In previous years, I don't think I came away from a series loss feeling better about the future. And even with some personal reservations that I do have, I'm still a lot more hopeful than I was the past few seasons. In previous years, I kind of knew what to expect. I still think I have a relatively decent idea of what they're going to do this offseason, but at least there's more that it feels like they're building off of. And, Bones really kind of started it a couple of seasons ago. Arneal is continuing it. And as long as he keeps growing and continues to evolve as a coach, I think this team has a lot of potential, right? I don't know where this road ends with this squad, and I don't know how this core is going to react. This was probably one of the most emotional playoff runs that we've had. Game 7 against the Blues is going to be that memory that everyone turns to whenever they hear 1.6. Game 6, Scheifele, putting on those Jets colors and still going out there in spite of all of the tragedy facing his family. That is, something that's just etching itself into your mind as a Jets fan. I'm really sad that it ended the way it did, and I was really hoping that even if the Jets still lost the series at home, they would have one more opportunity, one last dance in front of the home crowd. It's a shame that it got cut short, but it's been a huge season, one for a lot of growth and a lot of big moments, and one where maybe, the Jets have that taste of blood in their mouths now. They might be hungrier for even more in the coming seasons. Yes, it will necessitate some big changes, and I think that is something that this offseason we're going to spend some time talking about. I think from what Winnipeg has done so far, it does seem like they recognize at least part of that. I'm very curious to know how they respond and how they start to integrate those potentially big changes. The cap is going up too, so there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen this summer, a lot of movement. I think a lot of teams are going to have to really take stock of who they are and what they've accomplished and how they intend to advance going forward. Some of the biggest teams in the playoffs got knocked out in the first round. Colorado, Vegas, all those squads fell short. First and second rounds, apologies. Vegas, obviously, second round. But, a lot of these teams got knocked out a lot earlier than I think they were anticipating. Caps out in round 2 against the Canes in a pretty one-sided series. And for the Jets, even though they got knocked out this round, it certainly wasn't one-sided. Winnipeg definitely fought pretty hard and pretty evenly, but, I think they just hit the limits of what they're capable of. And so now it's time to kind of figure out, now that you've gotten this far, what is it that it's going to take to reach that next level? And specifically, I think this team's growth as a squad and as a group of leaders does make me feel like maybe they have some of the mentality and stuff to move forward and change how they approach either the offseason or next season. And we'll chat about that in just a little bit. I think it's a really big thing, and organizationally and culturally speaking, I think Winnipeg is in a much better spot than it's been maybe in the last several years. We'll talk about that and the growth of this team in just a brief moment. But before we do, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered where the heck all your money went? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. It offers you surprising insights, maybe on all of the streaming services and dining apps that you're spending money on. Maybe you don't realize quite how much is going out versus what's coming in. And you can do that all in one spot, along with several other features, including goal setting. And they even have collaborative tools if you've got a spouse or partner who shares your account. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are continuing to chat about what is, a very tough season loss. Obviously, Winnipeg came so far and fell just a bit short against Dallas after what felt like a year in which they might be a team of destiny. Unfortunately for the Jets, they in my mind, maybe met the other team of destiny in this playoff run. Dallas feels like maybe they've started to really put two and two together again. Not like they don't have a lot of recent playoff experience. They've hit several Western Conference finals as of late. They are a team that's been there, done that, and they know what it takes to get to that next round. So really, the Stars, I think, are one of the teams that the Jets should look up to as a model. But Winnipeg, I also think, has grown itself a lot. This past couple of years, I mentioned it just now and on previous episodes, but Bonus, in my mind, really started to shift in the mentality of this team. Look, they have had some moments in previous playoff runs and even during this playoff run where they folded under the pressure, right? There were some big spotlights on them. A President's Trophy coming into the postseason with not a lot of recent playoff success to put on their resume, needing to answer a lot of criticisms that were frankly valid. And this team, I think, to a lot of those questions, put up some big responses. I don't think that they've answered every single question, and I think that there's some larger stuff looming on the horizon with big changes to this team, how the front office is going to try and figure things out, and how this team can really take that next step forward to really become, one of the elite contenders. I think this team got a lot closer to that status than it's been in previous years, but there's still a lot of work to do. I do feel, though, that with sort of the culture change that the Jets have undergone the past couple of seasons, that they're better positioned to start to make those next changes, maybe take that next step forward. I think that there's still some stuff that they're figuring out. Like, for as much as the coaching staff has maybe been a little bit stubborn, it also at times feels like the Jets as players are sometimes really set in their ways. They seem to really like certain line combinations. You don't often see the Stars being moved around like Dallas does with their Stars, pun intended. You saw Rantanen being double shifted with even guys like fourth liners, and you'd never really see that with the Jets. And so maybe that's the next step, right? Really having a level of buy-in that goes beyond just laying it on the line every game, right? I think that there's more that this team needs to do between the Jets players and the coaching staff, but compared to where we were several years ago, where the Jets just weren't even on the same page with the coaches, I do think that there's going to be a much more productive dialogue this offseason, and I wonder if it really leads to some adjustments next year. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of trust between the coaching staffs and the players. I think that the relationship is tighter than it's been in forever, really. I don't remember the last time, maybe other than like 17, 18, or some of those earlier seasons where the Jets felt so tightly knit to where, they really have a lot of trust and respect for each other, a lot of love for each other. And I think the way that they handled that loss to the Stars speaks volumes about the character of this team and where it is now. So, for all my own personal reservations about maybe some of the on ice performances, there's very little to question about the heart and soul of this team. And I think that there's a good foundation to build on going forward. Whether you do it externally or internally, that's kind of a bigger question for the future. But I think for the Jets in the meantime, they have come a long way developing at least the internal culture and familial connections that hopefully strengthen this team going forward. In many respects, last night should have been, a really bad game for the Jets. You could have imagined them easily folding under the emotional intensity and weight of loss. It's all hard for them because it's not just Scheifele's father passing away. It's somebody that the team knows. A lot of those guys probably saw Brad all the time. They knew him. They probably had a good, strong relationship with him, as a lot of these guys tend to do. And I'm sure that they all felt the weight not only of that loss of connection, but sort of the stress that it put Mark under. And yet they still rallied and very nearly pulled off the comeback to bring it to a Game 7 in Winnipeg that, honestly, if the Jets had gotten to that point, I think they would have won the series. If Winnipeg had managed to bring it back to Winnipeg, I think the Jets could have come away with an advancement. Would it have been worth it in the end, right? I don't know, right? Obviously, Morrissey might have been done for the whole season, so There's real questions about how much further they really would have been able to get without him, but at least you live to fight one more day, and that's really all that I think the Jets were just really hoping for, right? A chance to play one more home game, a chance to put themselves in front of their own destiny and control it. And that didn't quite happen, but they got really, really close. And so I hope that as they've shown growth the past several years, that this offseason is once more one of growth. I've watched a lot of the post game interviews and stuff, and I think the rawness is still very much going to be a thing for the next few days and weeks. The emotional intensity and weight of this particular loss, I think, is going to sit very heavy on this team. But I don't expect it to be the defining moment. I think it's going to be one of those things where they pick themselves back up, they learn from it, and hopefully in the years to come, they grow from it. A lot of franchises have been in very similar situations, and some of those teams went on to subsequently win the cup in the following seasons. Look at Washington, right? The Caps had so many top end teams, and even President's Trophy caliber teams very nearly make it, but then every year they would go to Pittsburgh and they would lose in some like comical mental collapse that I think a lot of Jets fans are probably very sympathetic to. We've seen Winnipeg have those moments too. We know how this team has been in the past, and it didn't happen this year, but we've seen it enough in previous years to where we know what that feeling is like. We've seen it time and time again. So Washington had to experience a lot of failure before it finally reached the summit. For the Jets, there's probably a little more urgency just because our core is definitely getting on the older side. And, you're not really promised tomorrow with Hellebuck and Scheifele being as good as they are. They, continue to lead the way and lead by example, but you want to make sure that you're not constantly putting it off to the next season. I continually said that this year had to be the year, and I still do stand behind that, but that doesn't mean that the Jets can't make a future season the year. They just have to really reevaluate some things, continue to grow as a franchise, and I think that they took some really big steps forward this year. This is really the closest that they've come to tasting glory in a long time. When you put it in a perspective, it's been 7 years since the 17-18 season, and that's almost a decade of hockey in between. I know that 7 years is technically not 10, but it's very, very, very close. So it's been a very long time since the Jets have been this close to the final dance. And now that they have that taste, I'm hoping that compared to what happened the last time the Jets were this close, they don't repeat some of those same mistakes, right? This team feels like it's on a better trajectory and a better course. Maybe this being Arneal's first season is actually a little bit of a blessing. At that point, Maurice had been coaching for several years and started to run out of ideas in the following seasons. Arneal's really just starting out his tenure as a Jets coach. And even as a full-time NHL coach, when you think about it, he doesn't have loads of background and experience. He's been an assistant coach tons of times. He's had a stint as a head coach that ended very badly in Columbus. And sure, he has a brief tenure as a Jets interim head coach, but this is really the first full established job that he's been able to take over the reins and, really build off of some of his previous experiences. So along with the team, I'm hoping the coaching staff grows. We'll have to see what the front office does this offseason because I think that is a very big question mark as to how much they've grown themselves. But, for the time being, I just think that, this is a good evolutionary step for the Jets to move on and become a bigger, better, stronger team going forward. I think they've already done so many of the hard parts early. Now it's time to start to take that next step and really not only go that 5% better, but hit that hallowed 10% better. That's a tough margin, especially for how the Jets are built, but one that I think if they are ambitious this offseason, they can accomplish. Now, speaking of the future, I want to talk in very broad strokes about what kind of lies ahead for the Jets and some things that I'm sort of hoping to personally see out of this team as we get into the offseason. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Just wanted to thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day, as we are continuing to just sort of decompress from a very tough and stressful playoff loss. Obviously, this run ended in some unceremonious fashion, but the Jets really put on about as tough of a fight as you can possibly get and still came up just a bit short. And I think that this is a little bit where I'm going to slightly peel the Band-Aid off. I think Winnipeg was a very good team this year, and they certainly earned their President's Trophy. But I think the one thing for the Jets going forward is to understand why, when they reach the playoffs, they have fallen short in so many of these series. Losing in the second round to a team that looks like very likely a good cup favorite is really no disownment. It's not an insult. It's not a disgrace. I've seen a lot of people posting a bunch of BS on Twitter about it. I don't have that feeling like I may have had in previous years, but I think that there's been some instructive lessons for the Jets to learn. The first is that you need to lean on your youth again. Winnipeg hasn't done that in a very long time. They've brought in a couple of young players on and off this season, but they didn't really ask them to play pivotal roles. And for me, I think that that's a mistake. Look at how the Stars and some of these other teams are built. These squads lean on ELCs and young kids, and this Jets team needs to do that again. I know why they continue to be risk averse, and because they look at this as a situation where they need to hit a certain amount of home revenue, they need to hit a certain number of milestones, a certain profit level, and a stabilization of their business that might mean that you go a little veteran heavy, that you try to get all those regular season wins, that you try to guarantee at least a handful of home playoff games to keep the gravy train running. And I get it. But I think for the Jets, if they actually want to really reach that next level of competitiveness, it's time to start asking the kids to take bigger roles in the team. Now, based on how they've been drafting recently, I think the Jets in the long run do agree with that. I think the biggest question is, with that talent pipeline, how do you plan to integrate it and get it to the next level? The Jets are a draft and develop team, but we know that the development part has always been a complicating factor. You don't really see many of their prospects graduate into the NHL. And when they do, you don't often see them get many opportunities to take a bigger role. Cole Perfetti, I think, has recently become a rare exception alongside Dylan Sandberg. But when you look at a guy like, say, David Gustafsson, Gus is a player who I think actually could play a much bigger role with his team. I don't know how big that role is necessarily, but playing 9 minutes a night and being press boxed for the rest of it, I don't think is really his ceiling. I think that there's a legitimate player there, and it would be great if the Jets gave more opportunity to guys like these who've shown some growth and who've looked more like they're taking steps forward than some of the veterans that you know and trust. I love Niederreiter, but to be honest, he was awful during these playoffs. And I think he'd probably say something similar. And, he's always been accountable for his own actions. And so he knows that. But I think to some degree, you need to bring in that competition again. You need to let the kids have a real chance to stake their claim. And it can't be one of those things where they get a brief run and then they're sent back to the Moose or whatever. This has to be a more established process where the Jets make themselves a training and a battleground for young players. I think that this team needs to lean on that youth because it's how they were successful in previous years. It's really, in my mind, critical to how this team builds because we know that bringing in free agents is hard for this team. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want them to most of the time. Most of the free agents that they'd probably be interested in are not going to improve the team. We know that the team also continually has trouble with no trade clauses. I really wish they'd stop trying to trade just for the guys who have NTCs and MCs, but that's kind of a separate discussion for the front office future. But if you're going to not have as many guys externally coming in, develop and build out this squad from the inside out. And I think that that's really the key to Winnipeg's future success. Also for this upcoming offseason, it's going to be a very tricky situation for how you handle a lot of your RFAs and UFAs. The Jets have some major extensions looming, and it's going to lead to some big departures. I would expect at least a couple of UFAs to leave the Jets this season, including Ehlers. Nick sounded to me like when he was talking earlier in the playoff run about his time in Winnipeg that he was using a lot of past tense language, which to me makes it seem like he's not sticking around. Obviously, that could change, and maybe there's a surprise in store. But at the start of the season, I felt very confident he was leaving, and maybe my confidence isn't quite as high in that as it was at the start of the year, but I still feel pretty sure he's gone. And I think he's looking for a change of scenery and a fresh start. I mean, you look at the time on ice deployments with him in the past couple of games. Appleton playing more 5v5 minutes than Ehlers and Perfetti, probably not a good look for the org. So some real tough decisions there. But, this Jets team, again, they've got a lot to build around. but I think that there really is increased urgency for them to really start to take that next step forward. Hellebuck and Scheifele aren't getting younger. The same can be said for Morrissey. And after Morrissey's injury, I'm going to be real with you. I don't know what his play is going to look like next year. He's going to have a lengthy rehab this offseason. He may not even be ready in time by the fall season rolling around. It's only a few months away when you really think about it, and that's actually a pretty short time span. So for Morrissey, we don't quite know what he's going to be like coming back. We still don't even know the nature of his injury, but if it is a tear, we all know that those rehabs can be really tricky, and you may lose some of your ability to be an elite skater. So there's going to be an adjustment period there. You've got DeMello starting to age out, and I think that was really noticeable this season. You got all these things kind of coming to you in the very near future, and I think the Jets need to really start to call upon those young prospects that they've spent so much time amassing. They were so reluctant to trade any of them at the trade deadline too. And so if you're going to do that, make sure that you're ready to bring them into the team. Elias Salamonson, I think, is ready for some sort of an NHL role. We'll see how that sort of materializes. You've got Nikita Shubrakov, who frankly should have been on this team from the start of the season. I really felt like he could be a role player for this team. And he adds that extra layer of finishing and offensive talent in your middle six that I think this team has really been needing. That scoring talent that he's shown, it is legit. It's not like a short sample size thing. It's not like he just got lucky in his games. It's been a hallmark of his early pro tenure here in North America. So it's for real. Brad Lambert, he's still kind of a little bit of a cipher to me. We'll see what he is next year in camp. Next season in camp, not next year, because again, it's only a few months away. But I think he's primed to really start to take an NHL role. And especially if Ehlers walks, he's going to be a guy that the Jets call upon almost immediately. Braden Yeager could really be fighting for a role here in the very near future. Maybe he's your 2C that you've desperately been looking for. But again, he's going to need some leeway and some leniency to grow into his role. And it's not going to be 2C right off the bat. So unless he really comes out of the camp swinging and looks like a top 6 player, like so many other prospects, there's going to be a learning curve and some adjustments. So the Jets need to have a year of transition, most likely. And I don't know that they're really going to agree with that. I think they're going to try and run it back. And, to me, that's not the way to do it. This time, I think if you're going to run it back, it needs to be with some real conditions. And it needs to be with a level of competition that the Jets haven't always been open to. But hopefully, both the team and the players are a little more on board with it going forward. I think that would be really helpful for the growth of this team. It would be sort of a next logical step for the evolution of this squad, and it could lead to some really bright futures ahead. But curious to know your thoughts on all of this. Again, throughout this offseason, we're going to be talking through stuff. There will be some Band-Aid ripping about what the team needs to get right in the coming weeks and months and seasons throughout this week and offseason. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.